Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and I'm going to be doing a Elementsaber deck profile, which is a really cool deck that actually plays around with, go figure, the elements. You can actually change the attribute of every single one of these monsters while they're in the graveyard, which is super neat to be able to just change their attributes to suit the particular monster that you need. Hint, which is probably in the title, but hey, whatever. So, without further ado, guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below, because we have some awesome rewards for you guys, like getting your name in the description for every single video, getting a signed card to the mail, or even getting a requested deck profile, just like this one, every single month that you're a patron, along with test hands, which is super cool. So, without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So, first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Elementsaber Lupani Mana. This card is really good in the deck. It gains particular abilities based on the number, or based on the type of Elementsaber you send to the graveyard to special summon this card. You can send 2 other monsters from your hand to the graveyard to special summon this card from your hand. And it gains a particular ability based on the typing that you sent to the graveyard. It also has the ability that you apply the following effects to Elementsaber's Elemental Lord monsters depending on the original attribute. So if you send an Earth or Wind, it cannot be destroyed by battle. You send a Water or Fire, it cannot be destroyed by card effects. And you send a Light or Dark, your opponent cannot target it with card effects. Now the cool thing about this is that you need to keep in mind while you're listening to this deck is if you have Palace of the Elemental Lords, you send cards from the deck to the graveyard for your copy of your Elementsaber's particular effects, and you don't send cards from your hand, which is kind of nice to be able to essentially foolish burial the deck. We play 3 copies of the Earth Elemental Saber. What she does is once per turn you can send an Elementsaber from your hand to the graveyard, then target another Elementsaber in your graveyard or an Elemental Lord that's been properly summoned, and then you special summon it ignoring its summoning conditions. And once per turn this card's in the graveyard, which all your Elementsabers from here on out share this particular ability. Once per turn, if this card is in your graveyard, you can declare an attribute, and this card's attribute becomes that in the graveyard. So you can make them all dark, so you can summon Dad. Then we play 2 copies of Makaina. Makaina is pretty cool in this deck too because she lets you once per turn send an Elementsaber from your hand to the graveyard or deck if you have Palace. And then you get to add an Elementsaber or Elemental Lord from your deck to your hand, which is pretty good. We play 2 copies of Malehu. Malehu is my favorite of them all for artwork reasons. He has the ability that you can target a face-up monster opponent controls and change it to defense position if you send an Elementsaber to the graveyard, which is pretty good. We play 2 copies of Lupana. This card's really cool too. This is actually the negate of the deck, which is kind of neat. Because what this card does is you can once per turn when a spell or trap is activated, you can quick effect send an Elementsaber monster from your hand to the graveyard and negate the activation to destroy it, which is pretty good. I like that ability to just have that negate on the field. The only bad part about this card is it only has 400 attack, so it kind of sucks in the attack point range. We play a single copy of Malehu, or Malo, excuse me. Malo is really good in the deck too because it lets you send an Elementsaber monster from your deck to the graveyard by sending an Elementsaber from your deck to your hand to the graveyard, which is pretty good. So basically it becomes Foolish Burial with a Foolish Burial if you have Palace on the field, so it sends 2 to the graveyard, which can help you stack your graveyard, which is nice, but I feel like you just need 1 copy of it. 1 copy of Nalu. Nalu is pretty interesting. She lets you once per turn send an Elementsaber to the graveyard, and then you get to target an Elementsaber or Elemental Lord in your graveyard and add it back to your hand, which is pretty good to be able to just grab the one you particularly need out of the graveyard. Like if you need Lupana, Mana, you can grab that out of the graveyard, or you can grab any of the ones that you particularly need. We then play 3 copies of DarkArmedDuelist. Why would you not in this deck? Because if you get 3 Elementsabers in the graveyard, you can call Dark on all 3 of them, and then just special summon out Dad as many times as you want, which is really cool. And we actually play ways to search Dad in this deck, which is pretty cool, I might add. We then play 2 copies of Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. This card's, again, really good in the deck because you can just banish 2 of your Elementsabers that you declare Light and Dark on them. You banish them, and then you special summon this card from the grave or from your hand, and they can attack twice, and then it can also banish a card on the field. You can either do either or per turn, which is pretty good. And then for our 1 of Elemental Lord, we're playing a single copy of Phosphorage, the Elemental Lord. This card is essentially Raigeki. If you don't know this about these cards, all the Elemental Lords share an effect with a banned card. This particular card was Raigeki. When this card came out, Raigeki was banned, I believe, but this card's particular ability is if you have 5 light monsters, exactly 5 light monsters in your graveyard, which you can make them all light, which is pretty cool. And then when this card is special summoned, you can destroy all monsters your opponent controls which is, again, really cool. But the Elemental Lords have a little bit of a drawback, that they have the ability that you can only use their effects once per turn, and if this card leaves the field, you skip your next battle phase, which sucks. But this card's really good to play in this deck to just immediately board wipe your opponent's field and then go in with the 2800 beats deck. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Call by the Grave. Thou shalt can play 3 Call by the Grave, so you do. This card's really good because it lets you target one monster, your opponent's graveyard, and banish it. So you can hit hand traps and then negate their effects, which is really good. I really like this card, as you probably all know. We play a single copy of Terraforming. Terraforming is really good in the deck, too, because it lets you search your copy of the Palace, because the deck kind of falls apart without the field spell, which kind of sucks, but you really need to get to the field spell as quickly as possible. 1 copy of Foolish Burial. Foolish Burial helps you get your Elemental Sabers to the graveyard to be able to just trigger their effects by changing their attributes in the graveyard. Rhoda, because it is a warrior-based deck, so you want to play the Rhoda just to be able to get your particular plays off. 1 copy of Monster Reborn, because it's an extender and it can help you get more plays on your side of the field to make Link monsters, to make Xyz monsters. It just was a really good card overall. 1 copy of Card Destruction. Card Destruction is really good in the deck too, because Card Destruction is insanely interesting in this deck, because your cards benefit off of being in the graveyard, so you can drop the Card Destruction and then just send as many of the Elementsabers in your hand to the graveyard and draw cards out of the deck to be able to grab copies of Dad, to grab copies of your copy of Phosphorage, to grab the Palace. I mean, this card is really good in the deck. So then we're going to play something that we haven't done in a while, and that's actually guess that card. So I'm going to lay these cards face down. You guys are going to guess what it is and comment down below. So definitely comment down below. Tell me what you think this card is, and we're going to reveal it in 3, 2, 1. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and definitely check out the Patreon. So here's what it is. This card actually helps us search Dad, which is your last hint. So definitely comment and tell me what you think it is. And that is 3 copies of Chaos Space. Okay, so this card is interesting because it has the ability that you can send a light or dark monster from your hand to the graveyard, and then you add a light or dark monster that cannot be normal summoned or set with the opposite attribute. So if I send a dark, I have to add a light. If I send a light, I have to add a dark. That level is between 4 and 8. So, for instance, your cards that you can search are all 6 of these. That's why you play these 6. Because you can send from your deck to the graveyard. You can send your copy of Mana, which is 3 lights. You can send your Malehus to search your BLS. You can send out your Lupana to search out your copy of Dad. And then you can also send out your particular copies of Dad or your copies of BLS or your Phosphorage to search a different copy of one of them, which is pretty good. I mean, you can search out Dad with this card just by sending a copy of one of your upwards of like 8 light monsters in the deck, which is, you know, really good in my book. We then play 3 copies of the Palace of the Elemental Lords. All monsters you control gain attack equal to the attacking events equal to the number of different attributes in your graveyard, which if you already established your field, you can just call all of them different attributes, and you can go in with your opponent with an additional, I believe it's, if you have all the different attributes, it goes up by 1200, so it can make Dad a 4K beat. Good God, Dad is a 4K beat stick. Wow. What this card does also is once per turn, you can add an Elemental Saber monster from your deck to your hand, but you skip the next battle phase of your next turn. Even this card leaves the field, and once per turn, if an Elemental Saber monster is in your hand or field, would send a card from your hand to the graveyard to activate its effect. You can send any number of Elemental Saber cards from your deck to the graveyard instead, which you're usually going to resolve one of their effects anyways. We then play 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance because we really don't care about the extra deck. You're just going to summon a bunch of Link monsters anyways. So you can give up the extra deck pretty much. You can play anything that you want. I have some suggestion cards I'm going to show you guys to keep the deck a little bit budget, but it's not super insane. I definitely would recommend Blockade Port Blocker, but I have some good extra deck suggestions. So that's it for the spells. Let's get into the traps because we actually play 4 traps in the deck. So, for the traps, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Elemental Training and a single copy of Metaverse. Elemental Training is your opponent cannot target Palace of the Elemental Lords you control with card effects, and also it cannot be destroyed by card effects either. And then once per turn, you contribute a monster to special summon an Elemental Saber monster for your deck with a different original attribute other than a monster. And then you can send this card from the field to the graveyard, discard your entire hand, and then you add an Elemental Lord from your graveyard to your hand, equal to the number of cards discarded, which is pretty good to add phosphorus from graveyard to hand and just ditch your entire hand as well. And then a single copy of Metaverse is just to get your field spell on your side of the field as quickly as possible. So that's it for the main deck. Let's get into the extra deck. So the extra deck, we're going to be playing 2 copies of Blockade Borg Blocker. This card protects field spells and is why you play this card. If this card is linked summon, you discard a card, and then during your end phase, you add a continuous spell or a field spell from your graveyard to your hand. You'll lose the effect of this card once per turn, and then face-up spells you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. So basically, this card essentially just protects your copy of the Palace. We play a single copy of Boral Sword. Boral Sword is a helpful OTK maker. You can play a copy of this, or you can play Boral Load. You can play anything that you particularly want that's a link 4. Appaloosa just got a reprint. You can play Appaloosa. It's not super hard to get 4 monsters on the field. 3, 4 monsters on the field. It's not super hard. So you can play Appaloosa. You don't have to if you don't want to. You can play Boral Load if you see anything that's too expensive for you guys in this particular extra deck, you can change it out. Like a copy of Access Code Talker. I highly recommend Access Code Talker, but if you want to change it out to make it a little bit more budget, you can drop this, play Boral Load. It's totally fine. You're going to summon this a lot in the deck, but it's okay if you don't have the money for this card. It's not going to totally get rid of the deck because you have Dark-Armed Dragon. Dark-Armed Dragon is going to be the main monster you're going to summon in this deck anyways. You're playing a single copy of Unicorn just to bounce stuff. Highly recommend Unicorn at least. Phoenix to pop spells and traps. Again, recommend. Cerberus to pop monsters. Again, these 3 I recommend, and I recommend Blockade Borg. And then you can pick any of these 3 link 4s or a Boral Load. You can play 3 Boral Loads if you want to play 3 Boral Loads. Play any ratio of these that you want. 2 copies of Isolde. Okay, you can go for an Isolde package in this deck, but I don't play the equip spells anymore. You can. I just don't like playing them because I play Chaos Space to be able to dig into the deck for Dad. If you don't want to play the Dad focus deck, which I don't know why you wouldn't, that's why you're here. But if you didn't, you could drop your copies of Chaos Space and then randomly hard draw out the copy of Dark Armed and play 3 to 4 equip spells, usually 4 in the deck, to be able to grab out your copies of a warrior monster out of the deck, which would be helpful, but at the same time, it's just going to be good for link climbing. We play a single copy of Baguska. You can make level 4s in this deck pretty easily, or rank 4s. Exiton to board wipe. You don't really need this card because you're going to board wipe your own copy of the Palace, but this card's kind of there if you don't have Palace and you need to board wipe your opponent. Abyss Dweller to be able to just shut down graveyards, another good suggestion card. And then 2 copies of number 60. Number 60 is really good in the deck, and I highly recommend number 60. If I was going to play the deck, if I had to make it budget, if you guys always ask that, I play 2 of this. I play 1 each of Unicorn through Phoenix and Cerberus. I'd play the 2 of the number 60. I'd play the Isolde, and I'd play probably 2 Baguskas, and I'd be good, and maybe play 2 Boral Loads, and I'd be alright. I mean, you don't even have to have a full 15-card extra deck for this. You're playing Extravagance. So that's it for the deck, guys. It's really fun to play around with. I highly recommend this deck. The other reason I like playing Access Code in this deck, which you don't have to, I keep mentioning that, but you don't have to, is because you play Light, Earth, Fire, Dark, and Wind with the copy of your Appaloosa. So you have all those different attributes except for Water to be able to get you like 5 pops out of the copy of Access Code, which is why I love Access Code in this deck. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. It's a really fun deck to play around with. It's extremely budgeted in the main deck besides the Extravagance, which you don't have to play the Extravagance. You can play the copy of Isolde and then go for that package instead. But I wanted to draw deeper in this deck, so I played the copies of Extravagance. But it's totally up to you how you play this deck. But anyways, guys, that's it for the deck. I hope you did enjoy it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Hit the bell in there so you can come part of the notification squad. And definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below because it really helps out the channel. And we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.